Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host and real estate agent in charge of selling the Black House property. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Well, we got a real excellent property to look at today. It's secluded, first of all. The square footage is really quite something, given the price range.
It looks small from the outside, right? But you get in there, man.
You get in there, and I mean, it's really got just a lot of rumpus space, for the kids.
Rumpus space, guard dog included.
Included.
Don't you have to get one of those?
Yeah, sort of a natural wooded cover. It's really just a great buy. It would be a shame if anything happened to this property. You might want to grab this as soon as you can.
Yeah, the way the market's going, this could easily sell for $3 million, I think.
I mean, in this market, yeah, for sure.
This week on the show, we reach the end of our, sixth, seventh novel of this season, Black House. We're reaching the end of the book. Jack and his gang head into the house and rescue Tyler Marshall from his breaker fate. The day, the world, and of course, all worlds are saved. But Ka has one more cruel twist of fate for Jack Sawyer. Matt, what did you think of this week's reading?
Well, of course, this week's reading was the end of the book, and I found it very satisfying. I thought it was a good ending. Made me feel some things here and there. I liked it. I liked this book a lot overall. I think I love this book. It'll be interesting because I really haven't thought a ton about it. I'm reserving that for the whole book discussion, which is next week. But I thought this was a pretty good ending. It really buttoned up a lot of stuff really well. I think maybe I don't always feel like this much closure on an ending. So I think above average ending, very solid.
I like that. I agree with you. I think one of the most interesting things to me about this ending is not what it does, but what it doesn't do. And I think we'll have an opportunity to talk about a few of those things as we go through it. But it's just really interesting. Like, I think the structure of this book has, to me, throughout the course of this whole show, been really fascinating in the things we choose to do, the things we choose to focus on, the things we choose to not focus on and not care about. It's just been really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some stuff in here where, maybe we can finally make some. Okay, so in previous weeks, I've made remarks along the lines of, I won't really know what we're doing with that plot element until the book's over. And now the book's over. And so maybe we'll have some more holistic reflections on some of those specific elements now.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's get into it, Matt. Let's begin with our final first chapter of the book. That was a confusing sentence. We're getting into chapter 26 of the novel. The final part of our book begins with our authors once again talking about slippage, which has been one of our constant refrains throughout the course of this novel. This time, though, they're talking about houses and the role of houses in our world and this world and in general. The text says, wouldn't you say that most houses are an attempt to hold slippage back, to impose at least the illusion of normality and sanity on the world? And then they note, of course, that Black House itself represents almost the opposite of that. It is a house that is not sane, a house that is insane. And I think this is an interesting thing to talk about because, of course, this is not the first Stephen King bad house in his bibliography. And I really don't know if I've ever seen it kind of laid out to us as clearly as it is here, what the role of a house is in society and how these houses and the Black House especially seems to contradict that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we've definitely joked a few times about that the whole houses phenomenon, but yeah, I mean, we have the example of the Dutch Hill Mansion, which was another door between worlds, just like this one is. And I'm forced to wonder if the Dutch Hill Mansion in the Dark Tower was a intentional doorway between worlds, like Black House is. Like was that a way station between worlds built by some other demonic presence for some other similar purpose?
Yeah, it seems like it.
I don't know if I don't know if there's some other King book that addresses that, or if it's just like, no, this is just going to throw that in there. And then of course there's, the Marston House, which is not, a portal between worlds, but it is a kind of locus of badness. It's stained by the evil that inhabited it, and kind of serves as like this anchor that drags down Salem's Lot. So in that way, it's kind of another evil house that ends up being a sort of anchor of slippage, a sort of cause of slippage, you could say, because it kind of pulls Salem's Lot down into its slippage. I think we might have talked about this before, but I like the idea of Salem's Lot being another novel about slippage, because it's like this whole town falls between the cracks, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in the day to day, you think of your house as like, it's your fortress, right? It's your castle against both the elements, and then of course also, protects you against other people who might, want to rob you. In a very pragmatic sense.
Yeah, I mean, your house is the safest place you exist in, right? Or that's the feeling it gives you, right? Is a place where you can completely be yourself, not have to worry about any of the outside world stuff, and like your fortress. I think you said that perfectly. Yeah. And I mean, do you think this is kind of King and Straub commenting on generally on the fact that maybe this is why we are so inherently fascinated by haunted house stories? The fact that it is kind of taking this idea of this fortress, this castle, this place where you are safe and comfortable and your guardian against the outside world, and making that place unsafe, making that place illogical, irrational, and insane. I think that there is absolutely something to that.
Sure. Well, I think there's something to, so it's interesting. You've caused me to think two separate thoughts. One of them is, I remember being small, and like the vastness and uncertainty of houses was scary. It was just too big, right? And in that sense, when you're little, you don't really know what a house is in the first place. It's just like, this is the world that you're in. And so the house is a kind of wilderness. It's a kind of obviously it's constructed, but as far as you're concerned, it's a kind of wilderness. Anything could be out there in the house, and so houses can be scary in that way. And then the other, and so it's like there is, I think, a kind of latent fear to the idea that like, you don't know what's in your attic. You don't know what's behind the walls, you don't know what's in your basement, or like maybe you abstractly know what's in your basement, but you don't know what's in your basement right this minute, right? And then also there's the second thing, which is the thing that Stephen King leans on a lot, is just like, we love to personify everything. That's why he writes books about evil cars and evil Amazon Kindles. And so it makes perfect sense that you would have the idea of an evil house where it's you give the house a spirit, you give the house an identity, and you can feel its malevolence even though it's just a building. So I think he plays with all these ideas, actually.
I think you're right. I think it's great because, like, obviously this didn't have to be a house, right? Like, there's nothing in the plot of this book that requires this specifically to be a house. But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to make a house that is not a house, that is more than a house, that is something insane and evil. And I think part of that goes with King's constant love of Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House, which he references in the text here again, which is not the first time he's referenced The Haunting of Hill House in his texts in anything Dark Tower adjacent. He does it a lot because he really, really likes Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House. But I think it's endlessly fascinating. And I mean, you pointed out two of them here, but I can go ahead and say there are more houses in Stephen King's world that are not good. I mean, and hotels as well, right? We had the Black Hotel back in Talisman. We had the Shining Overlook Hotel as well. Like, these are places that can become evil. I think is something he's really fascinated with.
Yeah, the Black Hotel may have also been a door between worlds, if you think about it. I mean, well, we don't really know what the nature of it, why it was built, but it could have been.
No, I mean, we do see in the end of this book a direct connection between the Black Hotel and the Black House, right? The chanting that our characters hear as they walk through.
You're correct.
It's really, really, I mean, I love it. I think one of the things I'll say here, and we can talk about it more when we get there, is it surprises me how little time is spent in the Black House relative to the rest of the book. We just don't spend a lot of time in there. And you would think with a book titled Black House, where this is like the place where the climax of the novel happens, like we just kind of work our way through it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's more of, it's like the scene in 2001 A Space Odyssey where they go into where at the end when he goes into the monolith, it's like a psychedelic trip where there's almost nothing plot related that happens in Black House. It's just kind of a transitory scene. That's not a complaint. I actually think that's a really cool scene.
No, I love the scene, but I wanted to present it here so we can circle back to it when we get in there. But it is just it's another one of those examples of things in this ending that surprised me.
Sure, me too.
So we fly through Black House, which we learn here is impossibly big until we get to the small sitting room with a figure sleeping on the couch. This is Charles Burnside, and he's hurt, Matt. He's hurt real bad. He had not recovered from the injuries he took last week.
That's great. So happy to hear it. Yeah, I was annoyed last week that he didn't seem too much the worse for wear after being stabbed. So really glad to see that he just wasn't aware of the extent of his injuries and he's actually horribly injured.
Yeah, I was kind of cackling to myself as you not made a complaint, but pointed out that it doesn't seem like he was as hurt by these things as he was.
Yeah.
He definitely is. So we see here that Mr. Munchin wants Burnside to move Tyler, but he's too tired and too hurt to get up. So Munchin appears here in Black House. Apparently he can take physical form. So we get a view of him for the very first time here, Matt. And this description is really interesting. We see first a whirlpool of black and a splotch of red, an ascot, and then the beginnings of an impossibly long white face, which is dominated by a single black shark's eye. This is the real Mr. Munchin, the creature who can only live in Bernie's head outside of the Black House and its enchanted environs. Soon he will be entirely here. He will pull Bernie into wakefulness, torture him into the wakefulness if necessary, and he will put Bernie to use while there's still use to be gotten from him. So what did you think of the description here of Mr. Munchin? And I've helpfully attached a photo into the script for you.
A photo, yeah.
A photo.
It's delightful. I love it. I had a very specific creepy vision of what it should look like. I think my favorite touch, maybe this is just me having bad reading comprehension, but my favorite touch was like sometimes there was just one black eye and then sometimes there are two black eyes and it's like, wait a second, is that because sometimes you're like sitting where you can see both of them, or is that because literally his face is sort of indistinct in a supernatural way where you're not really entirely sure how many eyes he has, even if you're looking right at his face.
Yes.
And I like that interpretation, actually.
All of the above.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's weird. He's creepy. We don't really understand. And interestingly, like we never really understand who he is and where he came from, right? Mm-hmm. He just a demon. Just this demon working for the Crimson King. He looked creepy and he's a bad dude.
Yep. Likes to eat kids real bad. Yep.
So at first, Bernie seems to resist Munchin, but then a combination of kiss and kill, promises of immortality combined with some good old-fashioned intestine squeezing convince Bernie to get off his ass and do his job.
Yep. It's really nice to see Bernie getting treated like dog shit. You get the sense Munchin has never really treated in this way before because Bernie reacts to it pretty badly and it kind of seems to turn Bernie against him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also like perhaps realizing his worst fears that this guy is essentially done with him. Yeah. And this is the last thing he's going to have him do, which we learn textually is exactly true. We learn that Munchin had another young kid he was eyeing to possess. He was basically done with Bernie.
Yeah, right. And I just have to mark this as yet another evil destroys itself situation, because I think part of the reason that Bernie decides to dally with his victim is because he's decided he's going to betray Munchin, and that's because Munchin treated him this way. And it's like, well, if he hadn't done that, then things could have unfolded really differently.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I wanted to highlight this part, which I just found endlessly fascinating. I'm not going to read this in the Munchin voice. I'm just going to read what he says here. He says, "It is not even beyond the realm of possibility," Mr. Munchin says, "that the years could be rolled away from you just as the stone was rolled away from the
mouth.
Mouths.
Yeah.
I was like, I wanted to say house for some reason. I was like, no, that can't be right. The mouth of Jesus Christ's tomb. So I think this is really fascinating, right? I mean, there's two things I want to talk about here. One is, can the Crimson King / Munchin even do the things that they're promising here for Bernie, right? The second is, how fucking wild is it that Mr. Munchin, a demon from another world, is using a Christ metaphor here in this comparison? I find that endlessly delightful. Like, this is one of those things that, like, as an author, like, the metaphor falls to you, right? Stephen King was raised Christian. Like, he has these metaphors in his mind, and he uses them, and we, the reader, could chuck it up as nothing more than that. It's like the author, it raised in a Christian society, like, has a lot of Christian imagery in his mind and uses it all the time. But that's not what we get to do here, Matt. We get to sit here and go, isn't it weird that this demon chose to use a Christ metaphor when trying to convince Bernie that he could give him eternal life?
It is, yeah. I'm never entirely clear on how, the demonology of, because a few things have been called demons in the greater Stephen King, cosmos.
Sure.
Right. And I mean, it's interesting because, like, even I'm thinking about, it's funny how much I've been thinking about Salem's Lot with regard to this book. I think because it's another book about, like, a town that is visited by an evil presence, and I'm thinking about the vampire. God damn it, what's
Barlow.
his name? Barlow. And he's very much a Stephen King vampire and not just a generic vampire, because he's not really scared of the Catholic priest. He's not really scared of the cross, like, as a cross. He's only worried about the cross as, like, a reference to this greater power. And so within, in my view of the way Stephen King thinks about this stuff, a demon wouldn't necessarily hesitate to, like, invoke the name of Jesus Christ to make a point, because the name by itself doesn't have any power. It's only when that name is used as a talisman of faith that it becomes dangerous to them.
Yeah, and to me, it's almost mocking it. It's like taking these totems of power, these people of power, these the spirituality and this faith, and making a mockery of it by, using it here in a metaphor.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, and I'm glad we talked about it, because it is really funny. I mean, it's quite rich to have the demon reach for that specific reference.
I laughed out loud. I mean, especially because in his accent, he's saying Jesus Christ, but on the paper is written Jesus Crizzy, which is just hilarious.
Yeah.
Good old Jesus.
Yeah, good old Jesus. It's great. And as to your other point about whether he's telling the truth about offering to, de-age Bernie, like, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Crimson King can do that, but also I don't think it was a serious offer.
Why would he want to do that?
Yeah.
Like, what would he get out of that? Like, Bernie's a tool. There's no reason to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a tool. He's outlived his usefulness. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think there's probably something somewhere that would allow them to maybe turn back time or something. Maybe some fountain of youth machine they've invented, since the Crimson King is so continuously linked with machinery, especially in this book. Maybe there's some sort of machine, some less magical, less directly magical thing, but more machination of something. I don't know.
I mean, vampires are also a shortcut to immortality. But
they probably just make them a vampire.
Yeah, right. That would be the good twist there.
Yeah. So meanwhile, Ty is dreaming of being at the Brewers game with George Rathbun, having won second prize in the contest despite not entering it. George, who we see here, of course, it is Henry, we see in this dream looks blind and speaks to Tyler. He says help is on the way. So we haven't talked about this contest very much over the course of the book, and that's actually to our detriment, because it ends up mattering quite a bit here at the end of it. But I just wanted to get your take on this dream in particular.
Oh, well, first of all, I should say I totally forgot about the contest. I don't have any recollection of this contest, but anyway.
It's just something that Tyler keeps bringing up, is how upset he is that he didn't enter the contest.
Okay.
And therefore he's not going to get to go to the Brewers game, and he brings it up multiple times throughout the course of the book.
Okay. Well, anyway, setting the contest aside, I wanted to mention, like, I didn't get choked up during Henry Layton's death scene. I really liked that character. I was sad to see him go. Didn't get choked up. Didn't get that sad. It felt like a fitting end to the character. But damned if I didn't get choked up by this moment where we see Henry appear in Tyler's dream to just not even really do anything meaningful, just be there and be a presence of support and maybe some degree of guidance and comfort.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just think that's really interesting. Don't you think that's kind of interesting? Like what makes a person get emotional is like, I don't know if I would have predicted that I would react that way. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that is really interesting. And if I had to guess the reason, it would be exactly what you said at first, is that while we all love Henry Layton, his death seems fulfilling on its own. Like, it's beautifully written, it's wonderfully done and orchestrated, and it just seems like it fits in the book. And then you've kind of dealt with that, and you're met with the scene where, like, Henry is dead, but, like, he's choosing to take this moment to appear to this kid and help this kid out. And one of the things I love about these books is it's not exactly clear here if this is literally, like, the spirit of Henry Layton, like, coming back to comfort Ty, or if this is just, like, the overwhelming power of the White using the essential idea of the goodness of Henry Layton and George Rathbun to channel something to provide support for Ty. And it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Like, the literal answer to that question doesn't actually matter, but I do like this idea that, like, oh, look, Henry is such a powerful presence, such a powerful person, that he's still influencing things even past his death, and that matters here. We'll see that here in a bit too with the baseball bat. It's just I kind of understand exactly why you got choked up here.
Good, yeah. And I agree with what you said about this book being really intentionally ambiguous about whether we're actually seeing messages from the afterlife, because they do the same thing with his mom, where it's super like we never quite get the clarity on whether it's his mom or not.
Yeah. So Burnside carts Tyler out of the room, but not before putting a special cap on him, a cap that will dull his breaker powers for the time being. A cap that Tyler also, like, immediately forgets about until a very opportune moment at the very end of the book. But I want to talk about Tyler Marshall a bit here as we move into these final chapters, because he's been like the MacGuffin at the center of this book from the very beginning, but he hasn't been a character we've spent too much time with outside of that initial chapter we saw him in. And I really want to just focus on, like, this is another Stephen King child character who just, like, has this core sense of self and strength, that, gets himself into horrible situations, but finds a way to get himself out of it. I think there's another reason why you're thinking of Salem's Lot a lot this week, Matt, is because we have Ty, tied up by an evil person once again, and just like Ben, has to find his way to get out of it. Not Ben. Mark Petrie.
Mark, great. Yeah. I also blanked, but yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, that's funny you mentioned. I didn't think of that, but yeah, there's something very familiar feeling between the way Munchin behaves and kind of what he ultimately is. He's not literally a vampire, but he's a creature that feeds on the living flesh of the innocent, and he doesn't transform them into vampires, but he does kind of steal these children away, for suffering. That's really interesting. Yeah.
And I mean, I love, I don't know. I also just love Tyler as this guy who, has gotten this sense of, we use the phrase, like, steel, like inner steel, like, a lot, like, I think that ever since Drawing of the Three and we were defined Eddie Dean having this steel inside of him, we've kind of used this phrase to describe these characters who show this sense of inner strength. And I love that we see that on Tyler here, but not entirely, right? Because I love that what King does is he still makes Tyler just a kid. And so he does have moments of just, like, flat out panic, mixed in with all the steel inside of him.
Yeah, right. That also reminds me of Mark Petrie, where like the thing that he's facing is just absolutely terrifying, but he manages to find a place where he can work with it.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this a lot during Salem's Lot, but I continue to be absolutely fascinated by this idea of king characters, especially king children, who can deal with stuff that would maybe drive an adult mind insane just by like this ability to imagine things in the world beyond our understanding, right?
Yeah.
Like Mark Petrie was able to accept that there were vampires quicker than anyone else in the town because he had, and I don't know if it's the innocence of a child, but the kind of the open-mindedness of childhood. Yeah. And I think Tyler is able to process some of the most horrible things that another person would completely shut down of, maybe because of, just the general fear of the world that every kid carries, that this is just another part of the unknown, terrifying world. And so I just deal with it because like every day you wake up and you don't have a good grasp of what the world is capable of yet.
Right. And for an adult, this kind of horror is just like outside of the bounds of what we have learned is possible. And so it just kind of would break us. Whereas for a kid, it's like, I don't know what's possible. I guess this is possible.
Yeah, sure. I will accept it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Also, always good to see the old power dampening hat. Another concept that will recur in the Dark Tower as well.
Yeah, definitely. Gosh, the once again, I'm kind of just prefacing a conversation we're going to have in a bit, but it's weird to me the things that King chooses to directly port over to his final 3 Dark Tower novels and the things he doesn't. There are definite references and mentions to things that will flesh out the rest of the Dark Tower story, but there's also things that you would think, having set them up in this book, he would directly reference them in the final 3 Dark Tower books, and he just doesn't.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about that shortly. Yes.
So Burnside leads Ty to a golf cart and has him drive the golf cart into Endworld. I think one of the most weirdest contradiction of images that I've ever seen is just a little kid driving an old man in a golf cart into Endworld.
Wasn't there some kind of similar weird contraption that Roland and his crew use when they get to Endworld?
It's like it's not a truck or a car, but it's something similar, like a cart, like a battery powered cart or something.
Yeah, right. Well, what's funny is it might actually be a golf cart, and just neither of them know what a golf cart is.
When were golf carts invented? Would anyone in Roland's content know what a golf cart looks like? Yeah,
right. Because at that point you only have Susanna and Roland, so it's possible that it was the same golf cart, is what I'm trying to say here. But yeah, no, like I love that it's this disturbing mix of high fantasy and utilitarian practical serial killer solutions to problems. Like it really, like, it feels like Mordor, except there's a golf cart. Like I love it. It's great.
No, you're right. That's so great. So once we get here in Endworld, we get our first information about what is called the Big Combination, this impossibly large machine owned and operated by the Crimson King and powered by kidnapped slave children. Matt, we've never heard of this thing, and we will kind of know why we've never heard of this thing by the end of the book, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it, because we're seeing it's kind of like a Rube Goldberg skyscraper of nebulous use. We don't actually ever get like a firm bit of information on like what it does and what it's for, other than it's just like big scary machinery enslaving children.
Yeah. I mean, so, okay, a few things. First of all, I figured the Big Combination must be a reference to something, but I tried to Google it and I couldn't immediately find anything. And I gave up because I don't like to Google things too hard because I don't want to accidentally find spoilers.
Sure.
But I figured it might be a reference. I don't know. Couldn't figure it out. Second thing is, like, in a certain sense, you could see this as being like the Isengard part of the Dark Tower, where you could even say Munchen is our Saruman, and the Big Combination is the machines of Saruman at Isengard, and Merry and Pippin and the Ents aren't the main central characters of the story, but they have an important role to play because they destroy Saruman's war machine. And that's basically what happens here is these are not primary Dark Tower characters, but these are important Stephen King verse characters, particularly Jack, obviously. And they take out this locus of evil. So that's my regular Lord of the Rings corner. Actually, this is gonna be one. This is gonna be one of multiple this week. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, everyone.
I can't wait.
Then final thought on this is, like, as soon as we saw this thing, I was reminded of whatever the red glowing pulsing evil thing in the distance was that Mia and Susanna saw when they visited Midworld or Inworld, I guess, to have their palaver. I guess that was in the Dark Tower. And, I was so sure that I was right about this that I was even expecting some kind of confirmation, but obviously we didn't get that.
Yeah. So you're right, by the way. I mean, so the other thing that the big combination is called is the Forge of the King, or Antak. So yes, the glowing forge that Mia and Susanna see in the distance is this thing. But this is kind of what I meant by it's weird, the things that King didn't put in those books. Like, you would think he would have a fun like reference directly to the fact that this is the big combination and it was destroyed by some meddlesome breakers or something, it just seems obvious to me that that's what you would kind of want to do is tie it back more directly, especially since this book ties so directly forward in a lot of ways. I kind of like that they didn't, but it is just so odd to me that you create this thing called big combination, this forge, this power plant of the Crimson King that Jack and Ty dismantle and destroy, and that's only kind of very offhandedly mentioned in the finale of the Dark Tower, even though it seems to be extremely important. We're kind of led to believe that perhaps one of the reasons why the beams survived as long as they did was that this part of the Crimson King's operation was halted.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know how galaxy brain to get here, but I figure it's the Forge of the King. It's a power plant. It's not making electricity. It's harvesting suffering for the purposes of evil magic, right? Mm-hmm. And you blow up the Crimson King's source of super evil power, and maybe that's why he turns out to be a gibbering old loon who shrieks at Roland and throws snitches at him, Yeah. Like I don't know how literal to be with the idea that the reason why the Crimson King is so disappointing is because Jack Sawyer blew up his power source.
Very possible. And this is, again, I'll repeat myself, I like this. I like the ambiguity of it. I think it's fun. I think it's much more interesting than had Dark Tower 7 just said, and then the forge was destroyed by Jack Sawyer and therefore blah 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 blah. I like this ambiguity. I think it shows that these worlds are connected and the things that are happening in one are mattering in the other, but it doesn't have to come right out and state it like 100% clearly without any doubt.
I agree. I think I do like it better where it's left for us to wonder. I mean, surely I'm not like the first person who thought of this. Like,
no, definitely not.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so we move on to chapter 27. This chapter begins with Dale and Jack heading back to the sandbar to meet up with our two other members of their quartet, Beezer and Doc. Once again, as they go into the bar, a Lily Kavanaugh Sawyer movie is playing on the screen, and much to our delight, it seems that both Jack and Dale have it just about memorized as they just repeat lines from it to each other. The most interesting thing to me about this scene, though, is Jack, looking at Dale's confusion, says to him, "I know most of her lines. She was my mother, you see." And I think this is really important because, to refresh our listeners, one of the early scenes of the book has Jack acting like a total asshole to Dale because Dale like pokes and prods at his past in a rather indirect way, and just sends him home without dinner after getting his help. Yeah. And so this is a way as we move into the climax of our book to show like, look, Jack has changed. Not only is he much more open about his past, but he's bringing it up. He's revealing it. He's telling the truth. And I think it's really important that we just establish Jack has changed. The events of the last few chapters have changed Jack, and he meant what he said when he said he's going to, tell people the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like we talked about a bit last week. The book doesn't really shove the catharsis in your face, but we see it play out, visibly around the margins through choices like this. I thought this is a beautiful moment, even though it is this, very, very minor, you could almost miss it moment.
Yeah. Small important note here before we move on to, we learn that Beezer has sent his wife back to Idaho until this whole thing is finished, where she'll be safe, making her the first Susan in a King story not to have some horrible fate suffered on her, right? I guess technically her daughter was eaten and murdered, so that's kind of horrible.
Yeah,
but
she got off easy, relatively speaking.
She didn't get burned at the stake, so
yeah. No, it's a break in the pattern. Maybe there's a sequel where something horrible happens to Susan. We'll see.
Yeah. So Jack summons the power of Jamba to bring some bees into the bar and lift a jar of honey over to him. He does this because for this whole thing to work, they need to believe fully in the power. And so a demonstration is in order here. What do you think about this idea, Matt? That we're kind of being presented with this idea of belief in King stories and why belief is so important. We see here that Jack has them put honey under their noses to lower the effect of Black House on them. And this is not because this is like magic honey or it's not like honey itself has some certain qualities that ward off evil. It's really just because he tells them that it can do this and he gets them to believe that it will work. And so thus it works. So what's your feeling on this whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think this works with the picture of the King cosmology that we have been given up to this point. But I think it's really fascinating, particularly the way this plays out, because it seems like Jack is the only Stephen King character to ever fully understand that it is indeed about belief, or more specifically, faith in something greater than yourself, which we call the white, which Stephen King calls the white. But the point here is that it doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you put yourself into the hands of this greater power. Mm. And here it's awesome, I think, because Jack kind of hacks the system. He does what is more or less a parlor trick by levitating the honey container, and then uses that, leverages that to be like, yep, I'm super magical, and now I'm going to give you this thing and it's going to keep you safe. And it works. He cultivates in them the faith, and then he tells them just believe, because why wouldn't you? Because I just told you that it's magic, and then they do, and it works perfectly. It's I don't know. I thought it was very, very delightful to see Jack kind of just pull this out and have it work.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like saying that you must believe in God, and here is an example of God existing. Mm-hmm. So to me, the thing about belief in a higher power has always been there will never be any way to get definitive confirmation that such a thing exists. And so belief is kind of choosing to believe in absence of evidence. But yeah, you're right that Jack can just say I'm going to use this power because it really exists and it's here to get people to believe. Not that makes it easy. It still is challenging, but it's certainly easier when you can show them that you have magic bees that float things over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was great, though. It was very fun.
Mm-hmm. So we get this line here that I wanted to briefly mention. On the TV, Lily has just taken the first of about 6 bullets. She dies in this one, and as a kid, Jack always hated that, but at least she goes down shooting. So that's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, Lily's death is the reason for this whole book. It's mixed in every single page, but I'm really interested in this idea of, but at least she goes down shooting, right? This idea of, okay, she's got to die, but at least she goes down fighting. Because the thing about Lily Kavanaugh Sawyer's death is that's not really how she dies, right? I guess if you want to call a fight with cancer as going down shooting, I think we've talked about how I think that's stupid. I don't like that we use that kind of nomenclature when we're talking about someone dying of cancer. But she kind of just lies in a bed and slowly wastes away. It was kind of what we were told last week, is
Right.
like that it takes forever and is torturous and awful in every single way. And I think maybe perhaps that's part of the reason why Jack is so resentful of what happened to her. And, perhaps, as you reasoned last week, perhaps the reason why he's intentionally blocked out everything that happened as a child, because he wants to push all the stuff behind him, because the end of this was just her, not her going down shooting, not her going down fighting, not her going down a hero like Wolf gets to be, or like Henry gets to be, but just dying in a mundane, boring, terrible, horrible way,
Yeah, exactly what you said. I mean, I think she is his hero, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to see her die like that in a way that is sort of meaningless, right? I mean, I think it's interesting to consider how, part of what makes Henry and Wolf's deaths something we can kind of accept is that they're meaningful. They're sacrifices for something. In most cases, you could argue for Jack, specifically. And Lily's death. I mean, it's just she died because people just die. There's in fact, most death in the world is not for anything. It's just like, it sucks, and then people die, and that's it. There's
I mean, it's the advantage of living in a story versus living outside a story, right? Because typically when you live in a story, death has meaning, and all the characters that exist within the story that die, their deaths do have meaning. And I think that's one thing that I like about the choice to remove, like, there's a version of this book you can kind of see where the book opens on Lily's death, right? Like, if we want to catch a reader up on everything that's happened to Jack since the Talisman, and Lily dying is such an important part of Black House, let's open on her death and let's see her die. But I think the book wants to separate that from the story itself. Lily's death has nothing to do with the events of this novel, in a literal sense. It has everything to do with it in a thematic sense. But so separating it from the pages of the story allows it to just be this mundane death that has no meaning.
Now that we've said all that, you've made me kind of want to contradict everything that we just said, because because you could say, not that we were wrong, but that meaning is given to Lily's death by virtue of the fact that her death prepared Jack for what he's about to face.
Sure.
It put him in a kind of, I don't know, spiritual space where he's able to challenge this demon. Could argue that. I don't think it's textually clear that that's the case.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do think it seems like a very Stephen King thing to do, to say there is no such thing as a meaningless death. Everything is part of this great pattern, this great tapestry of the universe and Ka. And just because you feel like a death is meaningless and undignified doesn't mean that it has no greater purpose in this web of meaning that is the universe.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that the fascinating thing about Ka in general, though? Because we had one of our listeners email us last week saying they thought that we were being a little harsh on Jack and his refusal to get over the death of his mother. And they said their kind of reasoning for that was, well, look where doing that ended him up. Like, it got him to French Landing. It got him to this moment where he gets to save the day. And so you look at that and you're like, you're right. But you also look at Ka and you're like, yeah, but like it pushes you in the direction it needs you to go, regardless of what you want or don't want. Like, part of me wonders if his initial trip to French Landing was Ka being like, hey, Jack, you need to check this place out. Something bad is going to go down here and you need to be aware of it. And he just like missed the signal, because like, it is certainly not coincidence that the one that he's an LA cop investigating a murder, and it just has him just so happens to have a perpetrator that lives in this random town that is on the borderlands, that is going to be at the center of this battle for the entirety of his existence. Right. So like, you can just see Ka as being like this, like, yeah, here's me bringing attention to this thing, and then Jack kind of goes back to LA and ignores it and doesn't listen, or because perhaps he's trying to ignore the territories of it all, he doesn't feel something in French Landing that he should have felt. He does. I mean, like, right, he feels power and goodness, but like maybe the fact that he's kind of closed off to the territories doesn't let him feel the darkness underneath all that, because he's not fully allowed himself to go through everything that he went through as a kid. He's erased all that from his mind. And so the Ka really needs him to get there, though. It really needs him to do that. So the next time he does it, they put a dead Speedy Parker right in front of him. Of course, this is not actually Speedy Parker, we know, because Speedy's quote unquote alive still. Jury's still out on that. But, like, it's just like the old I sent you 2 boats thing, like where Ka is just going to continue to give you opportunities to go, or opportunities might even be the wrong phrase, continue to push you in the place you need to go, no matter what. I don't know, like I don't have any definitive answers here, but I think this is really fascinating, because you're absolutely right that Jack's refusal to grieve his mother is what gets him to French Landing, which is exactly where he needs to be. But also this book seems to be a book about, hey, you need to grieve your mother. So that seems like a contradiction, but it doesn't feel like one when you're reading.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely an ambiguity, because I mean, basically you and I just kind of argued 2 diametrically opposed ideas, and like that's fine. That's the fun of reading, is that you can read different interpretations into things. And I think that I don't think it's reaching to say that these authors are like aware of that ambiguity, and it's something they're intentionally sustaining throughout this work. Yeah. Because of how deftly they avoid ever actually nailing any of this in, like they very, very carefully do not ever actually make anything concrete that would make us feel like, oh, this was the reason for this, It's all kept up in the air. And King, very often, he will let you know what the reason was, So the fact that we're not learning the reason here feels like a choice. Is that, I don't know, man. It's interesting. I think, I'm not sure. It's either that, or maybe the themes are a little unclear. So it's like either it's genius and ambiguous, or it's kind of unclear and we can't really be sure. Yeah,
this is one of those moments where you want to kind of sit back and say, am I attaching genius to ambiguity because I liked the book, or was this just unintentionally unambiguous in a point that it hurts the themes? And I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a conversation for next week, but it's at least worth talking about here in the moment.
Sure. That it does sound like something we can return to next week, though.
Sure. So right before they're about to leave, Fred Marshall drives up bringing them a package, and then suddenly something happens. An interior shout, we're told at the time. We learn later that this is Ty begging for help that has somehow magically reached out to them all, but it hits them kind of like an earthquake, right?
Yeah, it's a disorienting scene in a fun kind of way.
Yeah, because like suddenly Fred Marshall's there and he's got a package, and Jack is like immediately like super aware of the package and like wants it and knows he needs it, and then suddenly everything stops as everyone feels something, and then we immediately cut away from that.
I love that he's wearing 2 hats when he drives up.
Yeah, because one of them's Ty's hat, right?
One of them's Ty's hat, and the other one, I guess he just put a different hat on top of the other hat.
Because he's a fucking mess. He's a fucking mess, yeah.
Right.
So we move back with Tyler as he is being handcuffed to the wall of a little shack, and we get this. If I let him lock up both my hands into these shackles, Ty thinks, I've had it. He'll cut me up. And once he starts cutting, he may not be able to stop himself. Not for this Mr. Munching, not for anyone. So get ready. That last is not like one of his own thoughts at all. It's like hearing his mother's voice in his head. His mother, or someone like her. So this is Sophie, right? But again, we have to ask ourselves the question, is this really Judy/Sophie literally talking in Ty's head? Or is this just the magic of the world, their essential strength and goodness being funneled to him in a more obscure way?
Yeah, I mean, what's funny is I would unhesitatingly say, oh, it's definitely Sophie, except for the fact that he's clearly wearing the psychic blocking hat. So if we want to get all plotty about it, it's like, well, it's probably not then. It's probably not Sophie being telepathic if he's wearing the anti-psychic powers hat. It probably is the magic essence of the white and goodness.
Yeah. I don't know. And again, I don't think it actually matters, but it's
right.
It's fun to question it.
Yeah.
So guided by Sophie's voice, in quotes, Tyler waits until the last possible moment when a second hand is about to be shackled, and he seizes upon an opportunity. He manages to knock into Bernie and grabs his balls, squeezing them until they pop and tear, which I think every listener out there that has balls just winced a little bit hearing me say that. I know it really hurt to read. Then he does something somehow worse than popping and tearing someone's balls. He reaches into Bernie's open wound, pulls out the man's guts, and squeezes them until he dies. This is holy shit.
Jesus Christ.
It's so explicitly brutal, and like part of you is horrified by it, but then part of you is like, yeah, fuck Bernie, I hate this guy.
Yeah, no, it's funny because we remarked last week how grotesquely violent things got in a way where they don't usually. This was another moment where I was like, it was very satisfying. I wasn't upset by it because fuck this guy. But it definitely was like, there's a reason they've never made this into a movie, because a little boy reeling a man's intestines out through his stomach wound is.
We cannot understate how detailed the writing here is of every single step of this process, right? It does not hold anything back. You have a very, very clear picture of everything Tyler does to Bernie's balls and intestines.
All of the nuances of the different feelings of the testicles being ripped and popping, and it's great.
And like we kind of get it. They try to put words to what it would literally feel like to have your intestines squeezed. Like I can't even begin to wonder what that would actually feel like, but they try here, and it's awful.
Yeah. Well, just imagine like the worst gas pain ever, except a couple feet outside of your abdomen.
I just involuntarily shuddered there. Like no joke.
Good.
I am kind of in love with how all this plays out, though, Matt. And it makes me think of the kind of, we talked last week about the uselessness of Henry's final moments, right?
Yeah.
That Henry warned the police about Bernie coming to kill Maxton, didn't matter. Henry identified who Bernie was, didn't matter. We already knew who he was, and even if we didn't, it doesn't seem to matter. And so we had this moment where like we said that Henry's death mattered thematically to Jack, but like from a plot perspective, Henry's death really didn't do anything. And I really think, looking back on it, this is kind of our authors 100% manipulating us to feeling this, because in this moment it comes back around, right? Like we are very explicitly told in this moment that Tyler is reaching into the wound left by Henry's knife. We're told that. We're reminded of that the only reason Bernie has this wound is because of Henry. And so in this moment, Tyler lives because Henry stabbed Charles Burnside in the stomach before he died. And so it kind of comes back around on itself and says, oh no, this mattered thematically. Henry's death mattered thematically. But the things he does leading up to that death also mattered narratively, because Tyler lives because of Henry.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And yeah, it makes it more satisfying that that's the case.
Yeah, because there's an inherent disappointment, right? Where Henry reaches out, stabs him, and we're like, fuck yes, he did it. And then the book is like, yeah, but it doesn't matter. He's gonna die anyway. Yeah. And so at least we have something to cling on to here with like, oh no, the stabbing actually did something. The stabbing saved the day, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a minor but worth pointing out kind of dramatic trick to kind of rob someone of satisfaction and then give it back to them. Mm-hmm. Like it feels more powerful than if we had just gotten that satisfaction in the moment.
Sure. And I mean, let's be clear here. It is not giving it back to Henry. Henry's dead. It is giving it back to us.
Right.
The reader. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So having killed the bad guy, Tyler realizes he's still stuck and that Mr. Munchin is coming. He calls out for help. And that, of course, is the noise and the great moment that happens to our characters right before we cut back over to this section. We also learn here that through something they all like briefly got an image of where he is, and Jack himself even briefly saw through Tyler's eyes, and they all kind of understand his situation because of this. And again, we need to remind ourselves that he's wearing that cap, right? That, you know, if he wasn't wearing the cap, you could say, oh, well, Tyler has the Shining, and so clearly he's just reaching out to people in the same way that Danny Torrance reaches out when he needs help. But maybe it's just he's so fucking powerful that that's what he was capable of, even with the cap on his head.
That's possible. I mean, I'm reminded of Mordred, you know, or rather, you know, Walter O'Dim being like, haha, this stupid kid can't read my mind because I got my hat on, and then Mordred being like, this fucking idiot, I can read his mind perfectly because I'm so much more psychic than he realizes. And so that's
true.
It's kind of already a possibility just based on that.
No, I like that. So then we get to the baseball bat, right? Jack opens the gift that Fred brought, and it is a signed baseball bat, Tyler's prize for winning the Brewer Bash contest, which we are told here and reminded explicitly of that he did not enter. He forgot to enter. His father did not enter him. And so once again, this is some force making sure that our characters have things in certain moments.
You know, this plot point reminded me of something else in the Dark Tower, maybe. I can't place it though. Some other moment where somebody gets magic mail that doesn't quite make sense. Is this like Susanna receiving a piece of mail when she gets to New York City? Is this like a piece of mail from Stephen King or something? Is that what I'm...
I mean, Susanna gets a message from Stephen King in the bathroom while dealing with...
yeah, but that's not what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
I feel like somebody gets a magical piece of mail that's like clearly supernatural. It doesn't matter.
You might be right. I'm not remembering it.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, just reminded me, like, sometimes Stephen King likes to give people magical mail. That's all.
And I love the text here, Matt. I love what this says here, because there's something about a bat, isn't there? Something that speaks out to our primitive beliefs about the purity of the struggle and the strength of our team, the home team, of the right and the white. Surely Bernard Malamud knew it. Jack has read The Natural a score of times, always hoping for a different ending. And when the movie offered him one, he hated it, always loving the fact that Roy Hobbs names his cudgel Wonder Boy. And never mind the critics with all their stuffy talk about the Arthurian legend and phallic symbols. Sometimes a cigar is just a smoke, and sometimes a bat is just a bat, a big stick, something to hit home runs with.
Yeah.
But it's not just a bat. It's the white.
It's the magic bat. I mean, I think I saw a tweet the other day that was like, every human being can appreciate the value of a good stick. It's because like it's just there's something instinctive about a nice hefty stick that it's just like satisfying, you know.
I mean, there's something really cool about a nice baseball bat too.
Yeah,
like, I mean, I think that the text doesn't hold back on this, and I totally agree with it. My father-in-law bought my son like a Louisville Slugger baseball bat, like decaled with the Mets, my baseball team, and his name on it for Christmas this past year, for his first Christmas. I mean, obviously he's 15 months old. He has no idea what it is or anything, but he will one day, and it's going to be really cool. And I remember opening this thing and getting that same feeling that they're getting now, which is like, holy shit, this is awesome. There's something about a baseball bat that is just pure, like, brings you back to childhood. That's why I love about the scene is like both Dale and Jack look at this thing and are kind of like hypnotized by it. And it's power, and it's not just its power as a symbol of the white, which we'll see it absolutely is, because we see it glowing and shooting rays of power, but just sometimes bats are just awesome. I love it.
Yeah, they're dense and heavy. That's how you know they're expensive.
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
Love it.
So the four head out back to Black House. I really love this part, Matt, here where Beezer and Doc drive right by the driveway. Mm-hmm. And then like when Jack pulls over, they kind of come back around and like, you idiot, you're in the wrong place. And he's not. It's just they've totally forgotten, because that's how Black House works.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. Like it couldn't kill them. And so now it's just trying to make them forget.
Mm-hmm. So right before they make their journey up the road, Jack feels a presence nearby. He pulls out his police-issue Ruger and puts 6 shots into the crow Gorg perching nearby. He moves so fast that the rest of the party couldn't even count how fast he fired, which is a pretty gunslingery move, eh, Matt?
100%. Very cool. Yeah, I love it. That was very cool. It's interesting because, Jack being a gunslinger doesn't really end up mattering at any point in the combined duology of the Talisman and Black House, except for this exact moment. But you could argue that this moment matters quite a lot, because things could have gone very differently if Gorg had been able to warn Munchen that they were coming, for example.
Yeah.
Not that we necessarily know that to be true exactly, but it's just I think it's cool that it's Gorg is somebody who we hate, separately, like independent. It's funny. I was reflecting after finishing the book, like, wait, so Gorg and Munchen are definitely distinct entities, but like I'm not sure what their relationship is, and it's like, you know what, I don't need to know. It doesn't matter.
The book doesn't want to give you that. Yeah, sure.
Right. It's just like whatever. Gorg sometimes represents Munchen, sometimes is just a spy for Munchen. Whatever, it doesn't matter. He's an evil crow, and he's dead, and it's good.
Yep, he's dead. It feels good. There is something I want to talk about here that I found really interesting. They're looking at him, all 3 of them, with identical expressions of stunned awe, almost of fear. It's a look that makes Jack tired, although he supposes he must accept it. He can remember his old friend Richard Sloat looking at him the same way, once Richard realized that what he called Seabrook Island stuff wasn't confined to Seabrook Island. I love this. I think this is really fascinating. I think this is one of those things that maybe offers a little bit of explanation about like why Jack has never fully embraced his essential hero-dom, maybe gunslinger-dom, we can call it, like the magic, like chosen one type stuff, is because people looking at him like he is that person is not something he particularly enjoys.
Yeah.
He doesn't like that feeling. He doesn't like how separate and lonely it makes him feel. We haven't much talked about the ending of the book and how Jack no longer is a man of the earth, and we're gonna get there for sure. I think this is one of those reasons why I'm content with it, is because you get the feeling that Jack living in the territories would perhaps experience this kind of stunned awe and fear. Maybe he would feel more content in a life where people aren't constantly looking at him that way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel you there. I think it's I think it works there.
Cool. All right, let's move on to chapter 29. This is our big climax chapter, and our characters head towards the Black House, and at first they encounter nothing, just some buzzing, some weird looking trees, some signs of a dog creature, and our old friend, the Black Hotel, we see make another presence here, because they also hear something saying, kill you, eat you, hate you. Yeah. I love that callback, but
me too.
It is interesting that their walk up to the house is so uneventful, right? I mean, especially after what we experienced the last time with the Thunder 5. Obviously, they have Jack and they have Jamba and they have the White on their side this time around. But I don't know, were you expecting more to happen on their approach to Black House?
Yeah, I think I was. I mean, definitely much was made of the security system of Black House, and it just seems like they walk through it without issue. I think, of the possible reasons why it's not a big deal. Probably it's mostly the White being on their side that matters here. It reminds me of the part of Salem's Lot once again, where our final remaining heroes, after having lost so much, like you think like, oh man, how are they going to get out of this? And then in the end, it's actually something very much like they just kind of become avatars of the White briefly, and they're literally like clad in the White. They're like glowing, and they just kind of like walk in and just like end everything.
Yeah.
That's what this kind of moment reminded me of, because I think once you have become, properly taken up the mantle of the White, then a lot of evil stuff that formerly might have stood in your way just falls down.
Yeah, no, I think you're right here. And this kind of actually, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to talk about something I wanted to talk to you about. Basically, the conflict of the book is not literally done, but I think the tension of the book is kind of done at this point, right? Like, I think Jack has passed his final test, and now he's just kind of going through the motion. I mean, that's why this walk up to the Black House is so uneventful. That's actually why their journey through the Black House is pretty uneventful as well. They're just kind of following a bee around, and then they get where they need to go. Like, they don't really, there's no, like, if you compare it to the Black Hotel and the Talisman, there's no last test that they must pass, right? There's no final challenge. There's no final fight that they must pass before they get to their goal, their reward. They just kind of go through it and see some weird shit and then carry on with their day. And I think it is because the test, the moment of Jack fully embracing the things that he's been avoiding was done after he, made it through the death of Henry Layton and decided to hold on to his sorrow and decided to do all these things. And the white and the bees and everything are kind of blessing him because of him making that decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think, we're going through this slowly. And so the power of that through line is maybe getting a little bit lost in the forest for the trees here, but like that is absolutely correct what you just said. Like, that's very evident as you're reading, that it's the narrative thrust is what you just described. That's or maybe I should say the thrust of the feelings that you're feeling at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So as I said, Jack, they're all at the front of the Black House. There's no door here, Matt. There's a picture of a door, but there's no actual door. Fortunately, Jack uses his level 5 spell Summon Bees and brings all the bees in the entire state to him right now. And just in case, this is one thing that I think that the book has laid on pretty thick, but it continues to do so. Just in case you have not drawn a connection between the Queen of the Bees and the Queen of the Bees, Lily Sawyer, the book is going to do it for you once again here, because as the bees arrive, we see Jack's mind is suddenly filled with thoughts and images of his mother, Lily dancing, Lily pacing around behind one of the cameras before a big scene with a cigarette clamped between her teeth, Lily sitting at the living room window looking out as Patsy Cline sings Crazy Arms. And so the bees come and he has all these images of his mother. And I think it's important here, Matt, a lot of the moments in this book where Jack directly thinks about his mother are sad moments of her death, moments of her sick, moments of, wistful loss. This to me feels like Jack just thinking of moments of joy and his and of life, of his mother's life. And I think that again to me shows a change in how he is framing the death of his mother.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the terrible things about grief is like when you're when you haven't quite been able to do that difficult thing of holding on to the sorrow and the grief at the same time, or however it is we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
All you really remember is the desolation and the sadness and the loss and the bad, the ending, how everything ended. And it's only later when you have kind of processed it further that you're able to holistically remember everything and the beautiful parts, and not, have it not be so painful that you can't think about those. So I think that's what's happening for him here.
I think you're right. So with the bees at his back, Jack commands Black House to let him in, and it does. A crack appears where the door frame should be, and they go in. So what's your bee opinion here, Matt? What is there's been bees and bee metaphor here from the very beginning. And I guess here at the end, like, the bees have become such a central part of this whole thing. And I mean, is it literally just like they were sitting around and being like, well, Lily's queen of the bees, I guess we're going to have some bees here. I don't know. What do you think? Kind of
do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like when you think of the idea that she's going to be the queen of the bees, and then you wait like 20 years to write the next novel, then a bunch of ideas percolate in that time frame, and one of them is like, hey, bees, it's a symbol, and then use that symbol in a bunch of different ways. Like, I think that's a big part of it. Because, I don't really think, you brought our attention to the first bee that shows up and kind of trundles through the murder scene. And it's like, oh, was that Lily Kavanagh Sawyer? No, I don't really think so. I think it was just a bee, but the book was drawing attention to it because bees were going to be important later,
Yeah.
I don't think I think it's more a symbol than it is like a thing that we're meant to drill down on too hard on a like plot level.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's just kind of, I think that the bees as a metaphor for Lily are pretty perfect because like they are everywhere, and like we constantly see bees referenced, and that kind of shows how Lily's death and Jack's grief are like pervasive in the story. They're just everywhere. They're just flitting around every moment.
I like that a lot. Yeah, they're always in the background, and you're not even really aware what they mean, but they're there. Yeah, I like that.
And then, of course, here at the end, they're summoned and swarmed, and weaponized in a way because he's fully embracing it and understanding it and processing it in the ways he should.
Right.
So back in N-World, Ty wakes up from passing out, and he's still trapped. He knows Munchin is coming, and we know that help is coming here. But I think it's really interesting how the book is kind of adamant about this one central fact here, Matt, that help is coming, but we cannot depend on them. They might not get here on time. Ty has to get himself out of this situation. Just curious what your thoughts on the book seemingly pushing that really hard here.
Well, yeah. First of all, the book overall puts quite a lot of pressure and responsibility on Ty in this moment and subsequently. Another thought that I kept having in this moment and kind of like repeatedly for the rest of the book is like, well, maybe things had to be this way because they would have gone much worse otherwise. Like, yeah, maybe let's just hold on to that because there's so many instances where that'll be relevant coming up.
Okay, sure. So Jack summons the queen bee who guides them through Black House. We see that the house is huge and almost infinite, but we have our queen bee that knows exactly the way to go and guides them through. And I love this moment here because Jack says, "Are you from her?" He asks this question in a low voice, too low for the others to hear, even Beezer, who's standing right beside him. Jack isn't quite sure who he means. His mother? Laura Delosian? Judy? Sophie? Or is there some other she, a counterbalancing force to the Crimson King? This somehow feels right, but he supposes he'll never know for sure. What did you think of that?
That's really cool. First of all, I thought it was interesting to maybe identify the white as a she. It kind of feels right somehow. And yeah, this is kind of what we were saying a minute ago, where the book is refusing to say whether this is really Lily Sawyer, or is it the white, or maybe those are the same thing somehow,
Yeah.
Maybe everyone's mother is the white. One thing King doesn't like to do is give you unambiguous signs from the afterlife.
Yeah.
If there's something from the afterlife, he pretty much always makes sure that it's like, well, that could just be, your mind telling you something that you want to hear or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that our read of The Dark Tower last year and the year before really opened up for me in that series was how much mothers mattered to it. Like it is very much on the face of it a story about where fatherhood and being a father, and the face of your father is such a through line in Dark Tower gunslinger culture. But how much to Roland Deschain, his mother, was kind of the inciting incident, the cause of so much of his issues unresolved. And so this idea that like the mother as a counterbalance to the evil, that the white, you're absolutely right, that the white could be like this mother figure that is counterbalancing the evil of the Crimson King, of this not exactly father figure, but possible father figure. I find that really, really fascinating. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's throughout the Dark Tower, throughout this book. And I mean, I almost hesitate to go here, but the book on writing is a pretty thin volume. One of the few things that is in that book is a rather emotional vignette about King sitting in the room waiting for his mom to die of cancer.
Yeah.
So like clearly this is something that was very important to him. And maybe, you know, in the same way that it pervades this whole book without ever really being explicitly stated, that's kind of how it is for Stephen King. You know, his mom's influence on him and her absence, I think that's a constant fact of his life. You know, I mean, I think our mothers are also a constant fact of our life, but it's something that we just take for granted because, well, they're our mom of you know, like
right.
In some sense, you know, my kid's mom actually said at one point, like, I want my kids to take me for granted because that means that they don't have to think about that as a question, you know?
Yeah. No, I gotcha. Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, we've talked about this before, but Stephen King is a man who was raised by his mother, whose father, you know, left them at a very young age. He never really knew his father. So he's a man who his image of parenthood comes from his mother, and his image of fatherhood basically comes from just being a father, right? Fatherhood is defined to him as how he was a father to his children, not how anyone was a father to him. And so a lot of his understanding of this stuff is through the lens of his mother and what his mother did for him and his brother. And like, it is really interesting. You know, we talk about this again and again, and we don't like to over psychoanalyze the author, but it is certainly true that mothers seem so important to the series. So important to the series. And I mean, I can't get over how much I missed that the first time I read these books, because I think Stephen Deshane is such a powerful presence in the novel that like you kind of like you're in awe of him in a lot of ways. And I think that's kind of, he's an absentee type of fatherly presence in a lot of interesting ways. And I mean, again, that's true for Jack Sawyer too, right? His father died, and he spent most of his time with his mother. And so like, I love the idea of what you said, is that the white is feminine, is motherly in some way. I really love that.
Yeah, it feels very right. Like as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh man, that's really going to influence the way I see the white from now on.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yep. Very cool. I think it's all connected.
So I want to talk to you about their time wandering through Black House, because as we said, they don't really come up against any direct pieces of conflict. Like there's nothing barring their way that they have to defeat or overcome. We get this little brief thing where Doc sees Daisy Temperley, the girl he accidentally killed when he was in med school. But besides that, we never really see anything of the house pushing them or testing them. They just kind of wander through these insane little vignettes of weirdness. And I guess we don't have time to go through every bit, because this section of the book is literally just like 4 pages of one paragraph of descriptions of all the weird shit they see as they're walking through Black House. And we don't have time to talk about it all. I just wanted to ask you, like, what is like your favorite thing that our characters see as they wander through Black House?
Yeah, I'd have to go look at it again, but the first thing that jumps to mind when you ask the question is the giant room of like washing machines that like goes on and towers into the air endlessly. Yeah. And there's like birds and but no, like just like overall, I just freaking love this part. I love the just raw, feverish imagination of it. And it's just very, very fun. Yeah.
It's so fun. It's like, you know, they get to take their gloves off and like the sky's the limit here, right? There's nothing they can't put in this house. So they're just going to go crazy. Every fun, weird idea that they've ever had. I like the part where they're just suddenly randomly like sliding downwards.
Yeah.
It's so wild. Like this is one of those things where I could just imagine a very creative director could construct some really fascinating sequences here as they wander through the house.
And one thing I like about it is that it's not quite anything that you've seen anywhere else, you know? It's very like successfully just like, what the fuck, like in a good way.
No, I agree. So finally they exit the back of the house and they find themselves in, well, it's not the territories, Matt, it's Endworld, right? Because we see here Jack looks around and he sees that his bat is still a bat. The 9mm and the Rugers are still pistols, and they are still they. Jack, Dale, Beezer, Doc. And Jack decides he isn't much surprised by that. Parkus told him this wasn't about the Twinners, told him that during their palaver near the hospital tent, this place may be adjacent to the territories, but it is not the territories. Jack had forgotten that. Okay, so we know now that End World and the territories are different, right? Right? We know that now.
Yeah.
Does that mean that the territories are in Midworld or not? And by Midworld, do I mean the section of Roland's world, or do I mean the colloquial term Midworld that is commonly used to describe all of Roland's world, which compromises End World, Midworld, and possibly all world, although sometimes all world is just used to describe the whole place.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'm reminded of that diagram that's like the Holy Trinity, where it's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are all the same thing, but they're also not. And just stop thinking, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do wonder if, okay, I think this is a good week for us, like giving credit for genius where maybe there's just confusion, but I do strongly suspect that King intentionally sustains this kind of ambiguity and doesn't ever want you to really be entirely sure how these things are related to each other, because it's more fun that way, you know?
I think you're right. I do think there's something to that. And the reason why I think that is sometimes he is a master storyteller, right? He understands why stories work and how they work and what we enjoy in them. Like I was thinking back to that quote where he's talking about The Natural, and Jack has read the book, hundreds of times, and he always wants it to end differently. And then when the movie gave him the different ending he wanted, he hated it, right? Like this idea that you think you know what you want, reader, but you don't actually know what you want. I know what you want. And what you want here is to not fully know all of this. And so I am going to enforce this state of just enough ambiguity, just enough factual stuff to hold on to, but enough ambiguity to where you don't exactly ever fully know where you are. I think that is 100% intentional. I have no doubt about that. Yeah.
No, I totally think that's true. I think that he's one of the few people who understands how Lovecraftian horror works, where the horror is that you don't know. And if you explain it, then you know, and it's not horror anymore. And you think you want to know where the xenomorph came from, or where the alien from The Thing came from. And you go read the background material on those aliens, and then you're super disappointed, and it robs all of the mystery and mystique from The Thing, and you like it less now.
Yeah.
You ruined it for yourself.
Yeah.
And King knows that. And so he keeps it ambiguous. He contradicts himself. You can never really be sure what you're dealing with.
Yeah. I mean, part of the fun of and the magic of Midworld is that we don't fully understand where its walls are, where its, what its limits are.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree with this.
Yep.
So back with Ty, we see here that he uses Burnside's dead guts to pull the bag closer to him that contains the handcuff key. He then walks the bag up the wall, lifts it, gets the key, and manages to escape. He does all this, Matt, and it's super gross.
Yeah, it's so gross and satisfying. I like that Bernie ends up being a puppet in death as well as life.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah. I love how we didn't talk about this, but Ty is like channeling Munchin a lot in this moment. Like he's talking to Burnside as he tries to use his guts, and he starts calling him Burn, which is a thing we've only heard from Munchin. So like obviously some of his shine is leaking through, right? Because he's kind of channeling and understanding these things and referring to him in a way that only Burnside and Munchin would know about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I guess I briefly wondered what was going on there at the time, but I think your guess is good.
I think it's also just his growing sense of confidence here as he gets closer and closer to escaping. He's being a little more smart alecky.
Yeah, I like that.
But unfortunately, he shouldn't have been so smart alecky, because as he walks outside, he finds himself walking right into the arms of the waiting Lord Malshan, which is actually the true name of Munchin, or the closest approximation to his true name. this is one of those moments that I think makes you go, huh, okay. Because the book is so adamant that Ty cannot expect help and must save himself, must get out of the handcuffs himself, only to then narratively just say, okay, you did it, good job. Oh, now you're captured by Malshin and you need to be rescued by Jack again. And so it's just as one of those interesting moments where you're like, huh, why did you do it that way? What's your thought on this?
Well, this is one of those moments I said we were going to kind of bracket and get back to where, okay, I mean, first answer, I don't really know. But, like, maybe it's just that if it hadn't gone down this way, then it would have been worse. Like sure. For example, if he hadn't escaped, then Malshin might have gotten the drop on the heroes, or Malshin might have escaped to wreak more damage in the future. And like that could have been like this is the only sequence of events that leads to them successfully saving Ty and killing Malshin. I don't know. I mean, another possibility is like Ty has to defeat this challenge on his own so that he's sort of spiritually ready to break the prison in the next scene. Like if he needed to be rescued here, then would he really be like the worthy hero to save all the children? And I really don't know. Like this is yet more of me kind of just confabulating, honestly. Like I don't think that it's super rooted in the text.
No, and to be clear here, as we talk about this, I don't mind the direction this goes at all. I think it's just one of those things where it just makes me curious, because I agree with you. This could very well, the simplest answer could just be like, had Ty not escaped, they would have come up on the shack and Malshin would have still been in hiding and he would have gotten the drop on them and everything would have gone worse, right? But don't you think if you're trying to develop a story in which you're trying to show why it mattered so much that Ty, get himself out, you would have painted that part of the picture, or at least made that a little bit more clear, which this book does not do. Yeah.
I mean, you're totally right. I don't see the hidden justification that I must be missing here.
I mean, the one clear thing to me is that like the whole thing was contrived so that we get our high noon Western standoff, right? That like we want this moment where Jack is on one side of the road, Malshin is on the other holding Ty, and they have to do this standoff. But that's a lot of work to get there, that we didn't need to do because we created this scenario where we wanted Ty to pick himself up by his bootstraps. I think the most logical explanation to me is the one that you said, is that like this was this personal challenge that Ty himself had to overcome, that like it is very important that he gets himself out of this situation, like for his continued development as a human being, that we want to see him succeed. We want to see him do well. We want to see him have an active role in how this whole thing goes down.
And it would kind of not be quite as satisfying if he were just, saved like a little baby. And then they were just like, all right, use your powers to do the thing. And it would just, some aspect of that wouldn't feel quite earned.
Yeah. Because it is certainly this wonderful badass moment where he manages to get himself out of the cuffs all by himself. And despite the fact that him immediately being captured again kind of colors that moment in a different light, it's still kind of a great, satisfying moment still.
Yeah, so I think it was.
I don't want the book to lose that, for sure.
Yeah.
But before we come up on Jack on the road, we have to talk about this moment, Matt, because Munchin is talking to Ty and a familiar name comes up. He says, "Don't cry, little Ty. You'll make new friends. The Chief Breaker, for instance. All the boys like the Chief Breaker. His name is Mr. Brodigan. Perhaps he'll tell you tales of his many escapes. How funny they are. Perfectly killing."
That's just great. Yeah. Not only his name, but also the fact of his many escapes.
Yeah.
Which does reappear.
Yeah, this is one of those Leonardo DiCaprio watching TV moments where you're just like, had you read Hearts in Atlantis, you're just like, oh, Ted, what? It's Ted.
Yeah.
By the way, kind of a non sequitur, but this whole thing makes me know definitively that had, oh God, what's his name? I forgot. Who's the main character of Low Man in Yellow Coats? Wow. How Bobby Garfield.
Yes.
There we go. I definitively know now that had Bobby gone with Ted when he chose not to go with him, he would have just ended up a slave at the big combination, right? Like 100%.
Yeah, that's a good point, because he wasn't a psychic. Yeah. And that would have kept Ted in line, probably.
So I'm trying to get my head around this in a way that doesn't make myself look like a hypocrite, because like we talked a couple weeks ago how the very specific Dark Tower references that filled our exposition chapter didn't work the best on us, that they kind of slowed the progress of the story to a halt in a way we didn't particularly like. But I liked this one, and I think it's because it's so brief and just kind of throwaway. Just like, oh, don't worry, little one, you'll love Ted. Everyone loves Ted, and then we just move on. And it doesn't. It feels like a fun little Easter egg without like the whole plot of the thing revolving around it.
I think for me, the one main thing is that this lets your imagination run a little bit. Like, sure. And you don't, or you can just ignore it and it doesn't distract you. But in either case, it's kind of fun. Whereas if you go into this long explanation, then like I'm not using my imagination. I'm just listening to your explanation, and that's just less fun. In general.
I will also say this moment works even if you have no idea who Ted Brodigan is. Like, I think it works in the moment because he's saying like, oh, don't worry. You'll be fine. You'll meet a new friend, the Chief Breaker. Everyone likes him, and he'll tell you about how he's tried to escape so many times and it's never worked. And because it just works as just bringing this sense of dread, even if you have no idea who Ted Brodigan is.
Right. That's a great point. It's almost more evocative if you don't, because you're like, wait a minute. The chief of the Breakers is a guy who's always trying to escape, and yet he remains the chief of the Breakers. What the hell does that mean? Yeah. And which, you know, it's funny because we know the answer now, but if you pose it that way, you're like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And of course, if you are someone who read Low Men in Yellow Coats a few years before this book came out, your jaw might have dropped a little bit, and you're totally jazzed about what this means for the future of the Dark Tower.
Yeah.
All right, so Marston begins his journey to the Crimson King's lair, but is stopped by 4 men on the road in front of him. Men from Turta, we see here, which is a slang term for Earth. We get our own slang term, Matt. Go us.
Yeah. It sounds kind of like turd.
Yeah. So Marston immediately recognizes one of the boys as one of those, as that kid that touched the talisman when he was a child, and then he becomes very afraid for maybe the first time in a while, especially because he's holding a glowing burning white stick, which, as you pointed out, once again, in our constant references to Salem's Lot, this is very much a weapon of the white tends to glow, just like it did in Salem's Lot.
And, you know, it's an icon of childhood in a way, right?
Yeah.
Which also strikes me as very kingy and very Salem's Lot specifically, where, you know, you have Mark Petrie running around like making stakes out of like whatever he finds. And you know, I also just as a brief parenthetical, like, isn't it interesting that the big combination is powered by the suffering of children specifically? Because it could have been powered by, you know, vast torture chambers filled with a variety of people, but it seems to be just children. So there's yet more of this sort of idea of like childhood being the kind of the root of everything.
Yeah, I think it's a great through line from the talisman, and I think it's great because you look at, like, they decided to tell a story of Jack as an adult, but they bring these ideas of childhood and the essential, you know, terror but power of childhood back again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really great. All right, so Munchin in his fear says, "Good day, gentlemen." The bogus German accent is gone. Now he sounds like a bogus English aristocrat in a West End stage comedy from the 1950s. So the question here, Matt, and this question doesn't have an answer, so try your best here. Why did he do this? Why did he do this?
Right. The question isn't so much why did he switch accents to a funny English accent as why did he have a German accent in the first place, which was also obviously fake? And why does he enjoy having weird accents in general?
Yeah. Like, why do the whole thing with the accents in the first place? Like, I imagine it took a lot longer to write Munchen's dialogue because you had to do all these fucking crazy spellings of letters to get across what the accent was, and it just doesn't seem to matter. And the first time we meet him in person, he's just like, "Just kidding, I'm British now." Like, it's just like,
okay.
I mean, I think like just like Blaine the Mono before him, like the evil people in this world are just kind of nuts, and this is just another way to show how nuts they are.
I like that. I mean, my unfortunate Doyleistic explanation is that they tried to write this scene using the German accent and it was unreadable and nobody could understand what was happening. And then they just fixed it by saying, all right, he changed his accent at this point. I mean,
look, what we do here is we analyze art and we try to attach meaning to everything. But like, I think everyone out there needs to understand how much of art is just practical problem solving of shit. When you look at something, like how much of the TV shows and movies you love that does a certain thing where you think of it as this great artistic choice that was actually like, we didn't have enough money to shoot this way, or actually the camera fucked up, so we only had this one angle and we couldn't redo it, so we did it. Like, I think it's the same with book writing too, right? You write something, you look back on it and you're like, this doesn't work. We have to redo this. How do we redo this? We can, if this change causes us to have to rewrite the whole book, this change just says yada yada yada, he switched his accents, it makes him kind of seem weirder.
Right.
Cool. Problem solved.
Right. Very often you just have to go with the thing that breaks the fewest other things.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful, wonderful art form. But yeah, so much of this is like as someone who hasn't been super involved in the process of making films, but has read and watched a whole lot about it, it's just, you just don't understand how much of it is just, we just need to get the thing done and solve the problem.
I believe it.
All right. So the two sides are in a standoff, and we get this line here, which I thought was a lot of fun. And so here it is at long last, the showdown. We cannot watch it from above, alas, as the crow with whom we have hitched so many rides is dead. So that means that like when we were doing the bird's eye view stuff over French Landing, Matt, we were riding on the shoulders of Gorg, and we didn't know about it, and Gorg didn't know about it. I just find that really interesting because, you know, we've talked several times throughout the course of this book how the moments when we're flying around the town are always very rooted in reality, in we are existing in this world, but just like an invisible presence in it. And here, this seems to directly reinforce that, right? It's like we were not magically flying around the world. We were on the shoulders of this evil bird thing. And just the fact that the book wanted to go that way is needed to make that clear, I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, maybe we were writing with bees sometimes as well.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah, no, I think that's very interesting. I agree.
But it's actually not a standoff, Matt, because it ends immediately because Jack just mid Malshin's sentence immediately attacks him. A beam of light shoots out of his magic baseball bat, nailing Malshin in the eye. Then another beam comes out of Beezer's commitment ring, nailing him in the mouth. Dale grabs Ty and Malshin falls. And then Jack finishes this thing off with a nice swing of his bat. That's ball game. How do you feel about this very sudden but very dramatic ending?
It was very viscerally satisfying. And yeah, you know, all this kind of nitpicky critical stuff that we may have been talking about in the last few minutes, I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was just like, yeah, kill him. I hate him. He sucks. And, you know, the squish of his head like a ripe watermelon or whatever, just great. Love it.
Oh, it's yeah, you're absolutely right that the way King and Straub write this scene are just such a satisfying conclusion. I liked this part where, you know, Tyler looks at the bat and says, George, the boy says, George Rathbun really is blind. Yes, Jack says, but sometimes blind isn't blind. Do you know that, Tyler? The boy nods. And this is something I thought was worth talking about for a couple minutes here because, you know, as you pointed out in the Talisman, smell is such an important thing. and it's also kind of reinforced in this. But I think also in this book, the common refrain is like, even a blind man could see it, right? Like the idea of sight and vision and seeing is such a common motif throughout the course of this book. And so I love here at the very end of the climax, you're saying sometimes blind isn't blind. Sometimes, the people that you think are the most blind can see the most, and the people that should be able to see can't see anything at all. I love that as kind of this ongoing motif, because I think Jack starts the book pretty blind to his past, pretty blind to what's happening and what's going on with him, and he learns to see, and part of the person that teaches him how to see again is the blind man.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, wow, yeah, I didn't think of the fact that toward the beginning of the story, Jack is like willfully blind. He is blinded himself. Yeah. So it's great. It's a great little motif here at the end. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, me too.
But it's not over yet, because Tyler wants to go home, but Jack somehow knows that Tyler is not done yet. He needs to use his power to tear down the big combination. And even though Tyler says he can't do it, Jack says, you can, and you will. What do you think, Ty? That we're just going to turn our backs on them and take you back to your mother, and she'll make you Ovaltine and put you in bed, and everyone will live happily ever after? His voice is rising, and he makes no attempt to stop it, even when he sees that Tyler is crying. He shakes the boy again. Tyler cringes, but makes no actual attempt to get away. Do you think there's going to be any happily ever after for you while these children go on until they drop and get replaced with new ones? You'll see their faces in your dreams, Tyler. You'll see their faces and their dirty little hands and their bleeding feet in your fucking dreams. So this is really interesting, right? Because he kind of goes hard at Tyler here. And part of that, I think, is absolutely like pushing him to do the thing that he needs to do. But I wonder how much about this speech is Jack dealing with Jack.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if it occurred to me until you framed the question that way, but and I really didn't know what to do with this, honestly, just taking it on its face. But yeah, I mean, you could say this big chunk of Jack's childhood depicted in The Talisman was a journey through his own version of the big combination. Instead of a big nightmare machine, it was places like the Sunlight Home and pretty much every other set piece of that novel. Just a string of horrible places that do horrible things to children, strung out across the country. And I think we even remarked at the time how he kind of just like went from place to place and left those places behind him, often still in pretty bad shape. And then maybe kind of at the end, he finds the talisman kind of like magically rights a lot of wrongs in his wake. But I think maybe he still feels some guilt about not having righted some of those wrongs, or just maybe not personal guilt. Maybe just he feels a sense of wrongness that these ills persist in the world, and here's a chance to do something about it. I don't know. There's a lot that you could say here. What do you think?
I think that's right. I think there, a lot of Jack in his journey, I think he honestly, legitimately felt like he was going to get to go back. His mother would be fine again. His mother would be saved and everything would go back to normal. And I don't think he got that. And I think he's resentful of the fact that he didn't get that. And he harbors a lot of guilt and blame in himself. I do think, the people that were suffering that Jack came across along the way, their freedom from that suffering was almost incidental, right? Like, I think the Sunlight Home does close down, but it's not like Jack stood there and said, I'm going to shut this place down because it is evil and bad. Mm-hmm. He flips over while in the Sunlight Home to a slave pit that may or may not be big combination. We don't actually know for sure.
Totally. Yeah.
I don't think it is, because we're pretty confident that's the territories, and we've been told again and again that this is not the territories, but I don't know, could be. And he doesn't free anyone there. He just leaves. He just goes away. And yeah, so this idea that, something that is said a little bit later in the epilogue of the book is Speedy looks at Jack lying in bed and says, one of the most remarkable things about him is how much of his innocence has been maintained. And it's because of the talisman. The talisman maintained his innocence in a lot of ways. And I wonder, like, Speedy says that's like awe-inducing, but also like, don't you think that's bad in a lot of ways? like part of growing up is the tragedy of losing that innocence, but also the understanding of what the world really is. And I don't know. I think Jack didn't fully grasp when he came home what his life was going to be like, what life was going to be like now. And I think a lot of everything that's happened to him since has been his inability to do that. And I think in a lot of ways, he doesn't want the same thing to happen to Tyler. He doesn't want Tyler to go through this experience and then just become him.
Yeah. I mean, I like what you just said there. Like maybe he didn't really lose his innocence until he lost his mom. And in a sense, that happened much later than most children lose their innocence. And yeah, I guess avoiding leaving Tyler with this incorrect sense that like, the world is this charmed place that and you're the chosen one and you will be taken care of henceforth. It's like, no, you need to do your part here. You are not going to be taken care of. This is going to be hard. Really, I mean, yeah, I think you're onto something. I think that's basically the root of it. Very minor, like observation or whatever. And maybe we talked about this back when we were reading The Talisman, but like, I distinctly remember that in the slave pit, they don't see Ferd Jenklo's twinner. They see Ferd Jenklo. And that always struck me, I think we talked about it at the time, but it's like, that's weird. That's like the only time this has happened where it's the actual person and not their twinner, other than Jack and Richard, who are single natured. Yeah. Why would that be? And it's like, well, if it was indeed Endworld, somehow the waving hands here, a portal to Endworld, then that would be for Jenklo. They threw him into the big combination, just like you said, Yeah.
No, I like that. I like that a whole lot. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, like the thing that this makes me wonder is at the end of these two stories, are we saying that maybe it wasn't a good thing for Jack to go on this quest to save his mother? Like maybe people die, and like in the real world, there's not a magic talisman that will cure them of their cancer. There's science, and hopefully that works, but sometimes people die and there's really nothing we can do about it. And part of growing up is learning that sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. That these things are going to happen and we can't stop them, and we have to deal with that. We have to do what we can. And maybe Jack's magical quest and the gift that he was given from the talisman, which is more time with his mother, was in many ways a curse, in that it cursed him, it touched him in this way that he has never fully escaped from. And we'll learn the end result of that is that he can no longer even live in our world, that he has to live in the storybook world of the territories.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's definitely I think a very plausible reading that it was a terrible burden that was put upon him and not some kind of fantastic opportunity,
Yeah.
Because it does kind of cost him everything ultimately. Like, he's super duper powerful. Like the demon is scared of him. That's cool. But he doesn't really get to live a normal life at all. Yeah,
he lives a very lonely, isolated life. None of his relationships with women have worked. He doesn't have a lot of friends. Like Henry Layton, really his first real friend, right?
Yeah.
In his life. It's a sad life for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bummer.
Cool. Yeah.
So back to the story. Jack slaps the shit out of a small child, which coincidentally serves to knock the thinking cap the boy had totally forgotten about off his head. With that removed, Tyler has the power to tear down Big Combination and free all of the children in its grasp, and he does it. I don't know why, but this is one of those lines that I think works really well. Jack is like, "You're a breaker. Break it." That's good writing right there.
Yeah. I also just kind of viscerally liked it when the boy knocks him on his ass using his 11 powers.
Yeah.
From you know what I'm referencing.
Yeah, it's Stranger Things.
That's it.
You've been watching the new season of Stranger Things?
No, I haven't actually. But
there's a talisman reference in the final episode of the 4th season.
That's the secret reason why I brought it up here. But yeah, I heard about that. I haven't actually seen it though.
Our wonderful listeners, who I love to death, made sure we knew about it because we got a lot of messages about it.
Yeah. I like the Reddit post that was just the Leo DiCaprio pointing at the screen meme with no particular context of just like
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And everyone's response is like, what? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm not telling you. You got to watch it. Yeah. I don't even want to spoil it here. It's a pretty direct Talisman reference, which is fun because the Duffer Brothers, who made Stranger Things, one of the projects they're supposed to be working on is an adaptation of the Talisman with Steven Spielberg. So that's cool. It's a double meaning reference there.
Awesome.
All right, back to this story though. In the wake of the destruction, a swarm of bees descends upon the guards. A big combination. They stab them to death, and then they lead the slave children out of there. And we get this section here, and this is very much reminiscent of the Talisman, right? When Jack first gets the Talisman. But basically, the tearing down of big combination caused this chain event that hurts evil across the multiverse, right?
Yeah.
We kind of see Ty's deeds reverberates through the great numberless string of universe, revenging evil as it spreads. 3 worlds over from ours, in a great city there known as Londonorium, Turner Topham, for 2 decades a respected member of parliament, and for 3 a sadistic pedophile, bursts abruptly into flame as he strides along the crowded avenue known as Piccadilly. I love that as just like, we get very little image, like we're told they're infinite worlds, right? We don't see very many of them that often. We see ones that are very close to ours or mid-world, and this is just like, here's a random world 3 worlds over where this terrible person just spontaneously bursts into flame. I don't know, I like it a lot.
No, I agree. It's like you kind of imagine him as like a little steampunk dude, and then he bursts into flames, and it's good. It's very good.
Yeah,
I love it.
So the Sawyer gang heads back home, back through the Black House and outside. They now realize that the house has just become a house again, but one that still needs some dismantling, which they plan to do later that night. And then, Matt, out of the house pours hundreds of children. Just so many kids led by a bunch of bees.
Yeah, I actually like it when a story of this general nature ends with the world at large being confronted with something obviously inexplicable. Mm-hmm. Like, it's not a full break into the supernatural where, there's video footage of magic happening, but there's a tip of the hand, like something really weird happened here, and people are going to be asking questions about it forever, and there's never going to be any answers. I just love that as like a narrative touch to end a story like this.
Yeah. I the magical children from nowhere, they're dubbed, that like no one can explain. Some of them come from our world, but like London, and then some of them obviously don't even speak English or anything approximating any language on Earth because they come from different worlds. And yeah, there's nothing that they can explain here. We're just told it's a bureaucratic nightmare, and that's delightful.
Can you answer without spoiling anything whether there's like the continuing adventures of the random children rescued from Black House?
There is not.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Maybe. I mean, I want to talk about a potential sequel to Black House next week.
Okay.
Because I kind of want us to play a little game where we outline what that would look like, what it would be.
Yeah. And
there might be opportunities there, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Cool. Okay.
So here's how this chapter and the next chapter is almost kind of like a denouement, but here's how this chapter ends. Still, they are safe, and our guys are safe too. All of them came back in one piece from the other side, and surely we did not expect that. Most quests of this type usually demand at least one sacrifice, a relatively minor character like Doc, for instance. All's well that ends well, and this can be the end, if you want it to be. Neither of the scribbling fellows who have brought you this far would deny you that. If you do choose to go on, never say you weren't warned. You're not going to like what happens next. So, very Dark Tower here, right? Like, I mean, I love what you said back in the Talisman about how the Talisman is in many ways a proto Dark Tower. Yeah. And I kind of look at Black House as like a prototype, what the final 3 books of the Dark Tower will look like.
Yeah.
And in this way, you can tell like King is kind of feeling out this sort of ending. And I think he goes on to nail it in the Dark Tower itself. I still love the ending of that book so much, but I love this here as like, we're testing the waters here. We're going to see how this works, see how it's received. And it's great.
Yeah. We're not going to do the joke where we pretend that we didn't read on this time though.
Nah, that's played.
That's played out. Yeah, no, it's funny. I kind of thought about just fucking with you and being like, Scott, I refuse to read further.
The funny part is this episode has been going on for so long that we could actually just do that joke and people like we could just cut it off here and people wouldn't know it until they got to this moment because they're like, oh, another 2-hour episode. I'm like, no, we still got a chapter and an epilogue left.
We just talked way too much. God damn it.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
All right, let's get on with chapter 21. Or 29, sorry. So we pick up the chapter with a press release organized by Jack and led by Dale to kind of greet the town and offer their best possible explanation for what went on in Black House. The group gets their story straight and then marches out onto stage where a legion of reporters and most of French Landing is waiting for them. They cheer on the Sawyer gang. Well, almost all of them cheer on the Sawyer gang.
Yeah.
And we get this moment, this classic King moment. Oh, how the cheers ring in these last few moments of Jack Sawyer's life on planet Earth.
God damn it, King. But of course, as soon as I heard the phrase on planet Earth, I actually knew that I was right and that he was going to not die, but rather just move on to the territories.
I like that. This is kind of a trick, right? He's doing the King thing that makes you think, oh, Jack Sawyer is just going to die. But no, he's like, withholding just enough information to where, oh no, he's not going to die. He's just these are his last few moments of life in this world. Yeah.
I also love that their explanation for what happened in the house was like, I don't know, there's chloroform or something.
Yeah, I don't really. There was like chloroform in the air, in the atmosphere or something. So we all just forgot.
Yeah, I don't remember. Yeah, it's great.
Because I mean, there's no way of explaining any of it. So
yeah.
So we see that Speedy is there in the audience too, Matt. Magical Speedy Parker, who always seems to know everything and know what's coming and be at the right place at the right time. But here, Speedy doesn't see this coming, at least not in enough time to stop it, because someone else is here, Matt. Wanda Kitterling, the woman who hated Jack Sawyer for what he did to her husband and was pushed and prodded by that asshole guard at the mental hospital. And she's here, and she's got a gun. And this is kind of why I was subtly, not so subtly, kind of always making sure to remind you of this plot beat kind of wandering in the background of our story.
Yeah, I mean, the text was clearly preparing us for some big something happening, but I didn't guess the nature of it.
Yeah. So Jack sees Wanda too, but not in enough time to stop her. And before we get on to the shooting itself, I'm curious what your takeaway from this part was, because there's this really interesting part where Dale does not notice the shooter, and he's holding on to Jack's hand, and because he's holding on to Jack's hand, Jack isn't free to like move or try to stop her or a bunch of other things. And are we supposed to be like, we're certainly not supposed to be blaming Dale for this, right? But certainly Dale blames himself for this moment. I'm like, I'm just sitting here wondering, like, why did we feel like we needed to add this part to the scene? What were we trying to do here?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is another one of those moments where I think to myself, like, well, maybe things would have unfolded, differently if Dale hadn't been holding his hand. Maybe Jack would have just died, or maybe other people would have gotten shot. I don't like that, or like that doesn't carry any weight for me or something. Like, I'm like, yeah, well, whatever though. Like, it's a book. You can write the book to be any way that you want. So
sure.
So why do that then, And I think, where I land on this one actually is just like, okay, well, it makes Dale feel guilty, which is just dramatically impactful on its own. And sometimes I think an author is allowed to do something just because it's a gut punch, and it doesn't necessarily have to tie into some greater tapestry of meaning. It's just dramatic and effective.
No, it has to all have meaning, Matt. Stop it. You've ruined our whole gimmick.
I mean, it usually ends up having meaning, but sometimes I think that an author is just like, this'll twist the knife, and then they do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing is, like, people come into your life and sometimes they leave it in tragedy, and what you're left with is trying to understand how or the why of it and how you could have done something different to prevent that from happening. And I think the thing we kind of see here is that, I don't actually ever believe that if Dale had let go of Jack's hand, he would have not been shot 6 times. Like, I just don't think that's realistic. Yeah. Like, this was always going to play out this specific way. But it just, like, when you're grieving, you look at every bit of that scene and are like, what could I have done differently? Oh, if I had seen the shooter, if I had let go of his hand, maybe he could have dropped or rolled or something, like you play it over and over and over again in your hand.
Yeah, right. I mean, just pragmatically, I think most men couldn't hold my hand so hard that I couldn't rip it away from their grasp if I needed to,
Well,
but
someone thinks very highly of themselves.
I just don't think that that you can grasp someone's hand. Like I can make my hand like squiggle out of, like I can get my hand out of the grasp of a 5-year-old, so I can get out of the grasp of an adult man.
Matt, I could hold the fuck out of your hand.
Oh yeah. Well, next time I see you, you're gonna have to prove it.
We're gonna. This took a turn. Don't tell my wife.
Yeah.
Yep. No.
Sure. No. Cut this part out, Scott.
The point is, regardless, Wanda fires all 6 bullets of her gun right into Jack Sawyer's chest and throat. And then we get this part, which I think this is really interesting. We know exactly what happens and what the scene looks like because our good friend and reporter Wendell accidentally caught what will become one of the most defining photos of his generation by tripping and hitting the shutter. And we see the scene through Wendell's photo. In Wendell's photo, Jack Sawyer looks calmly down towards the shooter, who is just a blur at the very bottom of the frame. The expression on his face might be one of forgiveness. Daylight is clearly visible through the hole in the palm of his outstretched hand. Droplets of blood, as red as rubies, hang frozen in the air beside his throat, which has been torn open. So Wendell captures this moment in camera. And the other thing we didn't say is that after their events of the Black House, our characters returned and blew it up that very night. And who was there to capture photos of the Black House exploding and burning down? Wendell, who sold those photos and got rich and famous just like he always wanted to. And so here's what the book leaves with. We have this asshole piece of shit character, Wendell, who learns nothing, who is not punished for any of the things he did besides, temporary physical, getting punched in the head a couple times. And then the book gives him everything he wants before it ends. And you're just like, what is this? How am I supposed to feel about this? Yeah,
right. I mean, not only is it not the redemption arc that I thought was going to happen, but it's also not like he becomes terrible and then gets his comeuppance arc. It's he just wins. So, okay, I don't know if this addresses your point exactly, but like, at some point, I think during this week's reading, maybe even last week, it occurred to me that we are Wendell, right? Because like we're hovering around, we're peeking into places we aren't welcome. We're peering into people's private suffering. We're indulging in these horrible sights. We're Wendell. We're the embarrassing people trying to obtain a keepsake from a murder scene. The floating point of view. We ride around with Wendell because Wendell is a convenient vantage point from which we can peek in at these things that Wendell is peeking in at.
Yeah.
We're identified with him. Yeah.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right. So it's the lesson here. Congratulations, reader. You got everything you wanted here.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's it.
I mean, joking aside, like sometimes the bad guys get what they want, like sometimes that happens. And this is, a book that kind of ends in a tragedy. And part of that tragedy is fucking Wendell gets what he wants and doesn't really suffer any consequences. For it.
The only consequences is he gets punched in the head a few times.
Yeah.
And then he wins.
And then he wins.
Pretty funny.
I wonder how the fuck he was there that night that the Black House blew up. Like he must have snuck out there, right?
Yeah.
Did he follow someone or was it just right place, right time type of thing?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think he was probably trying to get pictures of the house and just a coincidence, I would guess. I mean, yeah, sure. The idea that the idea that he'd follow one of the bikers, that also seems plausible too.
So Speedy rushes on stage, grabs Jack and takes him to the territories, leaving Dale with a bit of hope that there might still be some time to save him. And that's where the book proper ends. And we think that here we must leave them for good, standing under a blue summer sky close to the Father of Waters, standing beside a platform with blood on the boards. Soon life will catch them up again and pull them back into its furious current. But for a few moments they are together, joined in hope for a mutual friend. Let us leave them so, shall we? Let us leave them hoping. It's a pretty good end there. You know, giving these characters some hope that their friend will be okay.
Yeah, which makes you feel not quite so bad about Dale with his lifetime of guilt that he's going to be facing.
I agree. So then we go to what is not titled the epilogue, but is what is simply titled Once Upon a Time in the Territories. And we find here that Jack is resting and recuperating in the very bed that he watched his mother's twinner slowly waste away in decades before. We learn that Jack will live only because of his interaction with the talisman. Any other dead man would have been dead instantly.
Yeah, I mean, just say it. This is classic hero's journey. Jack returning to the exact point where the journey effectively began, albeit changed, which is very fitting.
Yeah. So Jack will recover, but he will never be able to return home to Earth again. We're told that if he stayed there too long, his wounds would return and he would die. He can only exist in the territories. And I'm curious, Matt, how you feel about this particular ending. Why was this a necessary thing to tack on to the back of the book? And what does it say about the things that this book is trying to do, in your opinion?
So you're asking, how do I feel about our hero succeeding in destroying the great evil, but being wounded in a way that made him unable to survive in the Shire, French Landing, and thus have to leave for the the territories? How do I feel about that? I feel like it's a great ending. It fits perfectly.
But is this, I love that, by the way. Thank you. Okay. I legitimately asked this question without even noticing that comparison. So that's really wonderful. But is this just what you were talking about, where Jack has been blessed to the point where he just can't live amongst the normies anymore? He never was doing it. He was not succeeding in doing it before, and now it's been made basically impossible.
Yeah. I think it's kind of like, we may have touched on this before, and also reminds me of Ralph Roberts, how it's like there's a cost to stepping outside of the frame of normal mundane life.
Yeah.
And that cost is, at best, you become alienated and distanced from what everyone else around you perceives to be reality, because it's not reality. That there's magic and demons and stuff.
Sure.
And then at worst, basically, it's you have to move on in some way. What does that look like? I guess it varies depending on the story, but yeah.
I also really liked this thing is said. Parkus is talking about Wanda Kitterling, and he says, "Hateful woman, I believe the Abela was aware of her no more than I was, but look at the damage she's caused." I find this fascinating, right? Because it would be very easy to say that she was just another piece on the Crimson King's grand chessboard of ensuring he got what he wanted. But no, this is just random hatred and chaos and violence that had nothing to do with any greater plan. It is, in the words of Insomnia, just the opposite of order. It's just literal chaos.
Yeah, I still like that sort of 4x4 matrix of good versus evil, and then order versus random, and how you can't necessarily just assume that random means evil. Random is just random. Sometimes evil takes advantage of it. Sometimes good takes advantage of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Then we get this part here. The business of the tower is moving towards its climax. I believe Jack Sawyer may have a part to play in that, although I can't say for sure. In any case, when he heals, he won't want for work. He's a capice man, and there's always work for such.
Love it.
So he did not have a part to play in the business of the tower.
Yeah, narrator voiceover. Jack never showed up again. Jack actually died. I mean, it's funny because it really is just King leaving himself an opening to bring Jack into the Dark Tower if he wants to, and then he didn't end up wanting to, I guess, or couldn't find room for it or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. It leaves it so open. All King has to write is go, Speedy was wrong.
Yeah.
At the end.
Or he could leave it himself open in the sense of, there could be another Jack Sawyer novel. It isn't necessarily the closure of the Dark Tower. It's something else. Jack Sawyer doing something in Midworld, that could be fun, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really know. Yeah. I don't know if that's the kind of thing that he would actually do, but it's possible.
We'll talk about that more next week, I think.
Okay.
But so we leave this book with our epilogue, Jack wakes up and he is met there by Sophie, who's waiting for him. And so, like the end of the Talisman, we get a person who was on the brink of death waking up surrounded by their loved one. And it's a fitting, beautiful ending.
Yep.
And that is Black House. The end.
The end.
We did it.
So happy. Just loved it.
All right. So, Matt, this episode's really long. We're looking at the time right now, and we're like, wow, we went really, really long on the finale of this book, and we still have discussion questions to read. I think we've made the judgment call here to just read your answers to the discussion question from last week on our summary show next week. So we will read the answers that you guys posted. The question, for those that don't know, was who's your favorite character from Talisman in the Black House series and why, and which book did you like better? I think actually we didn't plan on this, but that question works great in a summary episode. So I think it's perfectly fine to just kind of transport these questions over to that episode. So we're going to go ahead and do that. But we still have technically a question for next week, right?
We do. So what's our question for next week?
Next week, it's a summary episode, which means the question is send us your questions because it's a mailbag. We always do this when we do the summary episode. We always have a mailbag. It can be about Black House or the Talisman or King's corroboration with Peter Straub. It can be about anything Dark Tower. It can be about anything not Dark Tower related. Just send us your questions. We'll answer as many of them as we can on next week's episode as we work our way through this story and find out what we thought about it overall before we move on to our final book.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So next week, summary of Black House, reading the questions from this week, and then answering all your questions. Those are our 3 to-dos, and we'll do them all next week.
Awesome.
But that's it for us here this week. Thank you so much. We'll see you in our overview episode. I'm very excited about, looking back on this book and these 2 books in an overall high level perspective that we haven't gotten the chance to do yet.
Yeah, me too. I think there's still some stuff I want to try to figure out.
Yeah, definitely.
So remember you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, or on the subreddit at r/doofmedia, where you can send us your mailbag question.
And if you are not subscribed to Kingslingers, we strongly recommend you do so you never miss an episode of the final book in season 2, which is coming up in 2 mere weeks. We're going to be talking about The Stand. It's all very exciting. You don't want to miss it. So subscribe now wherever you get podcasts.
Yeah, and if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to us at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks to new patrons this week: Zach, Zengachi, Grady M, and Dr. Jesus.
I think
Thank you so much.
It's just Jesus, right?
Jesus. Thank you so much. We hope you appreciate the cool stuff we have over there, including the bonus podcast. We
got a new Other Levels of the Tower coming up next week too, I believe. That's how that timing works.
We should.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay. So it's never been a better time to pledge. Anyway, if you can't afford to do that, that is, of course, absolutely okay. Please continue sharing this podcast. Please continue talking about it with all your Stephen King buddies. And please continue leaving us a rating and reviews on all those apps that let you do that. This week's Spotlight review comes from Marie Curie is Sick, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Listen, you'll love it. An engaging deep dive in the Dark Tower and beyond. I started with the show after I made my first pass through the Dark Tower and have kept with it as they moved into other related books. I can't get enough of the show, which perfectly blends great conversations with careful analysis of the material. Listen, you'll love it." Well, thank you, Marie Curie. That's very nice.
Yes. We hope you get better from that radiation poisoning.
I don't think she is.
Oh, no.
And thank you to everyone who has taken the time to send those rating and reviews in. And apologies again for cutting the episode short by not reading your discussion questions this week. We hope you enjoy 2 hours and 15 minutes anyway. And we will see you next week as we discuss Black House for one last time. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.